Pandya is an author, academician, researcher, as well as the practicing architect with his campus Footprints Earth. Environment Architecture Research Technology Housing, graduate of SEPT University, Ahmedabad. He has availed Masters of Architecture degree from McGill University, Montreal. Yatin has been involved in city planning, urban design, mass housing, architecture. Okay. He has availed Masters of Architecture degree from McGill University, Montreal. Yatin has been involved with city planning, urban design, mass housing, architecture, interior design, product design, as well as conservation projects. Yatin has won nearly 40 national and international awards for architectural design, research, as well as dissemination. The most recent ones have been the All India Stone Architecture Award, United Nations Habitat Award Special Mention, and United States Curry Stone Foundation Design Prize for Sustainable Practice. He has written nearly 300 articles in national and international print media. Several books authored by him on architecture, especially courtyard houses of India. Concepts of space in tradition Indian architecture and elements of space making have been published internationally and been widely referred as course material. He has been involved in preparing over 30 video documentaries on architecture. He has been visiting faculty for 33 years at SEPT University and guest lecturer critic to various universities in India and abroad. He has served as thesis guide to over 200 graduate, masters, and PhD students. He has lectured in over 16 countries in over 100 fora. Environmental sustainability, socio-cultural appropriateness, timeless aesthetics, and economy affordability are key principles of his work. I would like to welcome Yatin, sir.
Thank you. Namaskar, very, very good afternoon. I'm saying afternoon so that you don't think that I have taken long, although I'm going to. But is this fine? Because, it's for your video. Because otherwise pictures are cuter than my face, so I usually keep that dark and keep this bright. All right, so I would imagine that we don't have, should I come there? If you're, I'm reflect. All right. So I don't think there's a debate on this. It's just that with this agreement as a designer, how do we then take our tasks further? So it's just a statement of recollection, so to say, that basically what we are designing, we have to think of, we are designing for the place, the people, as well as the planet. That's the kind of basic obligation that we have. And basic goal is that we want to create humane, sustainable and timeless built environment. So I think once we have that agreement, and which I don't think need to have that debate, we want to just start with, the big word research, I want to just kind of dilute that weight of that particular word, however, not to ignore it, but make it so much ingrained in our blood that, it's not like having to take a medicine, but what we eat every day has enough nutrients. So I think it's in that light I want to consider this research. It's not about knowing the technicalities of doing PhD. But what research is there's an old traditional text, ancient text, Sambrang and Sutradhar, which actually identifies the punishments for architects not doing their work. But what is it saying? That what is the responsibility and knowledge base of the true architect or a designer of a built form? He who begins work as an architect, that is Sthapati, without knowing the science of architecture, is proud with false knowledge and must be put to the death. So that's the kind of, as Raj Hinsak, you are the quack designer, you have no right to be. So you must know the science of it. Then the one, and his ghost will, all these scary things, those who are well versed with traditional science but not skilled will faint at the time of a war field as a timid person. So skill is also important. But those who are skilled but not able to know the meaning of the traditional science will be like a blind person. They know it, but they are not that effective. So the true thing is the combination where the pratyutpana, the readiness of the judgment in the kind of the creator himself, and he excites, oh, how I did it. So the whole idea of knowing all of these and being complete with that, but to do what? I think this is where that what I said about we knowing and applying that knowledge and therefore be ready with all that is essentially to be able to diagnose. I compare that with that profession of a doctor. Why do we go to a doctor? We might have fever as a symptom, but there might be 20 reasons, and 20 people in the clinic might have different reasons. So it is doctor who is putting his knowledge to use to diagnose that somebody has corona, somebody has fever, and maybe the student from design is just overworked in the submission, has nothing, she should sleep. So that's the kind of diagnosis, and once you know that, then it's very easy. You can even go to the pharmacist directly and take the pill, etc. So I think the whole essence, what then therefore we call research, is part of the day-to-day design processes that we have to engage with. So it's not something extra. It's not PhD degree. It is a part of being able to come to the right and appropriate, not good, bad, ugly, appropriate or inappropriate. That's exactly how we did even as a child. That innocence, nobody went to the school, but you figured out that if you have to be playing at the beach, you have to have sand which is moistened. It has to be compacted. It can only be scooped out. You can't make a wall out of it. Okay. So the point is that as child we have always played a designer. Point is, as a designer, have we learned to retain that inquisitive exploratoriness of being a child, or innocence for that matter. Just to say what really therefore design or architecture is. A pupil of architecture went to learn architecture to the guru, the Sthapati. Sthapati said, I can't teach you architecture unless you know sculpting, because it's about form, massing, etc. First learn that. He went to a sculptor. Sculptor sent him back saying that without actually dance there is no sculpting, because it has expression, hav-bhav, mudras. You must first be a dancer. The dancer sent him further saying that without music there is no dance. It's about pause and rhythm. You must first understand that. Went to a musician and he says that it's just not a composition of sound. There's an expression of a lyric. So you must first learn the lyrics. He goes to a poet, and poet says, son, there's nothing that can be taught as poetry. Live life, observe things, assimilate, analyze, and it's poetry all around you. So the point is, it's about living life, what you observe and how do you interpret, So therefore, what is research? Design is not about finding one answer to one question. It's about asking many questions, finding many answers to each question, and then picking one answer that answers most questions. It's about discretion, adding values, and ability to discern between appropriate and inappropriate. And appropriate to what? To the place, that is context, place, people, and program. So that's what it is about. Design has to inform, involve, and inspire. And I like to use these, I think the very high sense of this indigo flight and many, many things, but one thing that exemplifies that as the best, same flight, same trolley, steward would bring you 3 sets of cups, paper cups. It could have been very easy. Ahmedabadi businessmen would just have plain cups, maybe all small. It'll be nice, cheap, everybody usable, nobody would notice it. But this inform, involve, is inspire. This is one cup, little flimsy, more liquid, typically, ideally, for water. So it says stay hydrated, giving you the wisdom. And it's, I think, scientifically also correct to stay hydrated when you're in flight. But there's another one where there's a soft drink, so you take a little long. You take sip by sip, and it keeps you engaged. There are three puzzles of which one is a false answer, and it makes you think that maybe this, like this French fries are invented by French is one of the puzzles, which is actually the wrong answer. So likewise, it engages you, that involves you. This is a little smaller for obvious reasons. And then there's a third with a crumpled stiff paper for a hot drink, so that you don't get hot when you hold it. You don't have accidents by accidentally crushing it, etc. So the point is all paper cup, but I think obligation of that sort personified in that. Research paradigms, I think the history needs to be relooked from a different time frame. Rather than BC and AD, which we have been used to, it should be BC and AC, before Corona and after Corona, because I think Corona taught us a lot of these values of human being the microcosm of nature, the whole idea of, we got in fact the hope despite all the negative things. We thought that too many people, nothing can be changed in the world, but simply undue systems went out of the whole flow. Nature could correct itself. Many parameters that we know. Most importantly, the mindset with which we were developing before that paradigm changed from technology as the driver of development and remaining within the controlled environment to nature and thinking of outdoors. The whole two fundamentals around which, if our development is oriented, the whole symbiosis between human and human and nature, two fundamentals of any existence, then we will never be out of the sync, never be out of fashion. So this is where I think that shift need to be relooked, and that's where our goal, research, development need to be oriented to. We were trying to look at smart cities, nothing wrong about it, but that image, if it's a governing factor of what is smart, is scary. Okay. All this is what we familiarly see, but we can't place the name of any of this. Or other way around, it's too easy. You put any name and it should work, I could have just fooled you with any name, but of course these are true ones. And look at this. Is this the idea of a built form that we talked about? Holistic and imaginative. Back home, as diverse the context and still the outcome being what it is. Both of these are Kerala. We need to wonder which one is appropriate. That's where research need to go. Not turning backward, but wise what and what next, what is appropriate. Which one is relevant? Which Kolkata should we be taking further? So the whole idea of research is that it gives you better understanding and conviction and clarity between these terms, image versus identity. Image is what we want others to see us as, while identity is what truly our DNA, what we are. Again, Corona taught us very well how to manipulate this in front of a screen and otherwise. So what is the context? So first, understanding the context is one research that we all need to know. Context as planet, context as India, context as human being, context as society, context as piece of plot and geometry, whatever, Just broadly speaking, for Indian context, history versus tradition, otherwise seen to be a synonym, to me is an opposition. History may be a dead tradition, while tradition is a living history. Ithihas versus Pranali. Unfortunately, we make a mistake of looking at the manufacturing date and disqualify something that is 100-year-old, rather than looking at an expiry date to say that actually whiskey or pickle matures. That's why we simultaneously coexist in 3 time zones. Our moorings from past and aspirations for tomorrow co-create the realities of today. This is very smart Ahmedabadi way that it says Australia calling, it wants you to be a global citizen. But for that message, couple of thousand for 8-hour shift of a camel cart is more smarter and economical and yet effective, rather than putting into taste match crore rupee slot and getting out at 46 or 42. There's a whole thing about individual and collective. So what are the ethos of the context? Pluralism. How do we find a single answer that answers most questions, what we put before? So idea of multiple truth. Where you reach is more important than who takes you there. As many people, as many God. Every child thinks their parents are the heroes and heroines. There's no quarrel. If we try to avoid one, there's a problem. One 6-yard sari can be worn as differently and can look different on different body contours. Beautiful concept of thali. Thali is an idea of a combination meal. In pizza, after you exercise your choices of crust and topping, first bite tastes the same as the next, tastes the same as the last. You eat the same pizza as somebody else, they can share the experience of food alike. Turn it to idea of thali. Same 100% ingredient, similar and cooked, but you are the designer of bite. Every bite is a unique experience. First bite need not combine the same as the next, need not taste the same as the last. And two persons eating, they cannot compare the experience because somebody's sequence, proportion, and combination is different. And that's what I think we need in a design space, because how can same idiom be worked and be involved and be attached differently, even for different value system for different time. And that's why defining the contextual norms, we are soon going to forget what we learned in Corona, idea of multiple use of space, idea of what was important, family versus something else, idea of limitations of technology. It was a fantastic tool, but as a tool rather than something that we felt subservient to, and things like that. So those values are the ones that should reshape our built environment, and that's one of those kind of research. And that's why finding what's actually right rather than importing as an alien, and then we end up into this disaster. So the whole idea of aping versus adapting, mindless copy from a single source is always plagiarism, and smart copy from 100 usually gives you PhD. The holistic design therefore needs to go through this 6 parameters, 6 filters, So timeless aesthetics, because building is going to last beyond you, socio-cultural appropriateness, because you're always designing for someone, environmental sustainability, because resources are few, functional efficiency, basically that's what you're called for, economic affordability, without that it won't be viable, and structural stability or strength, because it has to last as much that building we want to. So therefore, all these are the areas of research. I would just pick up 3. Aesthetic, timeless aesthetic, socio-cultural appropriateness, and the environmental sustainability, just with something quickly that we've done is part of those which you know. So the point is, research has to begin with an intent. It's not data collection. It's not about technicalities of sourcing. But what is it that you are looking at, and therefore what kind of a correlation that you eventually may be able to derive. You don't have that judgment or answer, but it's that query that determines that. For example, a query that why some of the structures, I'm not saying ancient Indian, even this, to be fair, it's 74-year-old structure by now, and why it continues to be of value or inspiration or awe-inspiring for us. So that question about what is that so-called abstract term of timelessness that we find in the millennia-old architecture that continues to engage us, and one of my favorite is this step where. Why? Because it's all below ground. So unlike pyramid or something, there's no awe for scale. Second, technically it's not a shrine. It's a utilitarian object to fetch water. Okay? And it's 625-year-old, which is functionally obsolete. Including archaeology has made sure that you don't even go all the way up to the water, although there's a water. Okay? And yet, now we pay even the fees. and without elevator go down 5 full floors. What is it that draws us there? And if second time somebody sponsors, we still don't mind visiting it again. I've taken as many times people without feeling tired, but in case someday I was lazy not to carry camera, I feel very frustrated. I wish today was a little different. So what is that about it that we can learn today without having to replicate the elements or forms or material or technique? So principles that led to this whole book of concepts of space in Indian architecture. This is a simple kind of a diagram that explains the construct. I think nobody gets distinction for drawing this design. Too boring, teachers always say, कुछ tension करो इसमें, बहुत ही simple, predictable है. But nothing is predictable thanks to the element of stair. Like thali, every platform is a different experience, When you come, just these two outcrop and steps invite you that welcome here. You don't know what's coming, but look at the identity. To go down, you're made to go up. The moment you take first step, the void further is revealed. Thankfully, there is a void, literally, at the juncture, which has the sun, and therefore it draws you there. Once you come there, three sides you're surrounded by the steps, so now you're drawn to the fourth intuitively, and this is the most beautiful panoramic view. That's where you realize that your ticket was worth at least, And that's why, the welcome to my precinct. That's an invite from the precinct. And till that, the nuances were still unknown. You still don't see this water. But now he says that I'm so long. That's the first visual frame, but the last physical plane. Okay. Then like thali, first platform with big parapet wall, sky scene, it feels like a terrace, like Rajasthan terrace with parapet. It's bright and it is open. Sense of enclosure is little. Same, we go one further floor down, it feels now like a room. The intensity of light is decreased, sense of enclosure is little increased, visual composition has changed, and if you're perceptive, little bit of temperature is reduced. You go still further, and now you feel like a whale. You've been succumbed, you've been surrounded, it's further deep, its light is even less. So every place, and if you walk straight, it's symmetrical. If somebody walks like this, it's different. So each one can relate to in their own way. Like again, thali, it's your combination. And every time that you go, you could be different. And only at the end, water is revealed. So water was just merely an excuse. The whole essence is in the journey. So I always say, if Mr. Biden or Harris wants to come, I think they don't need to parachute him down with commandos. He should walk through this path. The traversing is important. Being there is important. And then all those, holistic design, I would say, hot, dry climate, there is no perennial river. If you make big cone, it will evaporatively lose when you need it. So small hole into the first aquifer. So any time of the season you have an access, small hole would ensure no losses. You go to the water, Muhammad goes to mountain, and so that earth doesn't cave in, you have shoring and strutting with trabeated construction, 7 or 5-story descent. Very simple, but very elaborate. So engineering wise, very sophisticated. Nothing has happened to this despite earthquakes. Social place in a hot, dry climate going below ground makes it cool and comfortable. So these platforms for the caravan travelers, they can rest there in the afternoon and it becomes a social place. Women around the water, there are steps. So every day doing this mundane chore, they can sit there for a while, bitch about their mothers-in-law and they praise their husbands or whatever. It's a social place. So utilitarian device becoming a social place, and with notions conjured, with association, becomes a shrine. Okay. For example, that frame that I told you, the last plane but first visual frame is Ganesh. So it marks the auspicious beginning of the journey, notionally. And the same ends at that of a fish, which means that you have been in the water world. Two association of Prithvina Petarma and a Prithvina Patarma. One is going to the womb, and therefore symbols of this motherhood, and second going to the Netherlands, sky and the heaven, earth and the ground, below earth and the water, and those associations come by that. And there's another things, any time of the day, 625-year-old structure, physically you're not allowed as a tourist to go there, but any time you will find it garlanded, either candled, or you have this kumkum. So which means those notions still continue. And many families, the newlyweds are brought there to seek blessing before they go on for honeymoon. So it's still live. And mind, matter, both. So nourishing of body, mind, and the notion. So utilitarian object exalted to become almost a shrine. That's the kind of thing we pick. So what is the derivative? And likewise of others. So the 6 experientially engaging architecture, disparate physical and visual. So you know where you have to go, so it's not a stressful labyrinth. The carrot is already there, but it's not a crow's flight. You have to meander, and therefore it is subjected to encounters. And therefore this whole journey, which, so disparate visual and physical access, but story of junctures. It's like a film. Munna Bhai MBBS wants to talk about one message, has 6 junctures created about human system, no kind of faltu, but become human, treat like this, don't involve too much of bureaucracy. So all those things around, so those 6 junctures are what creates that particular film. The rest is just attaching it. So it's story of junctures, which means layering and layering by sequential unfolding of space. So for example, we have been taught about Islamic architecture to be symmetrical, but with this landscape feature, I don't think it was expected routine to just clean yourself, swim through that, and then meet whoever, On the contrary, it just puts you off axis to appreciate that from another point of view. So movement holds the key, even for conditioning of mind. It's not drive-in darshan and suddenly, it creates that kind of orientation and pitch for you. Therefore, kinesthetics is the key. Rather than a plan, graphic and diagram, how do we perceive while in movement? And that's a fantastic, complex, but the most exciting quality of physical architectural space, where you perceive that while in motion. So that whole idea of kinesthetic perception, dynamic perception, every point your points of view change, and therefore the outcome of that construct is different, like we saw earlier. Like for example, from a very narrow labyrinthine streets of Agra, at one moment, till that you had no notion of Taj, and that narrow was an antithesis. So that when you come to Shah Jahan Gate, that's where you have that Dhantanan moment, and you know that it's a 4 minaret and the dome kind of a assembly. That's an abstraction you carry. Then you go down, you're not able to go straight, forget symmetry, all that. At one point, they found out in kinesthetic perception कि यहाँ से वो चोटी पकड़ी जा सकती है. That's a good selfie point. Everybody does that. But you've forgotten about minarets and all. And then one entry point to go up onto the top, which is not like Asiatic Library, a straight flight like that in the same axis. No. You have to go reverse and then turn, and that's where again that arch, and it's a fantastic recall. Remember, there were 4 minarets. I am here, I'll take you to Mumtaz. So it's amazing narrative that kind of comes through. Nature, again we learn from Corona, building doesn't change, but moment you indulge nature within the space, nature's nature is never to be constant. It simply changes. Now nature can be light, nature can be vegetation, nature can be people and activity, wind, landform, water. So the same physical reality, but interaction with nature constantly changes. And then, as we saw in the example, notion. For example, the social service that we do of painting public corridor red with our pan spits, no amount of warning has ever been successful. But if we put the icons of gods and goddesses, it changes the notion, and it now becomes a shrine, and we don't misbehave. So those principles, again, you've seen this very building. by a different person. So it's not the prerogative of one group, but it's the idea, the concept. Even Mr. Corbusiers' idea of promenade architecture is a journey, architecture is a walk. So you see here that this is the ensemble, but the first, like a frog's tongue, it swallows you in, and at that time, this is hidden. There is a stair, but it's hidden. Now it's a ramp, so you casually walk, but by default you are ascending, and therefore the first floor looks like a ground, and ground looks like a basement. Okay, so you come in like that. That time they're still veiled, but you have a trailer little bit here, and then as you come, then you see there's something at the back. When you come there, this is the river view. Mr. Doshi would tell you how much time they spent in finding the right shape of this little stool or a bench or whatever you call it. It's kind of a spin to turn you around. Now, and this is another nice element to remember. This looks like a wrapped around plane because it's taller than you. You don't know the third dimension of this. Okay? Now that when you're done with this, this is where the stair is revealed. Now the ramp is gone. You take this stair up, it stops there with a frame-like gateway, and you come further. That's where you see the third vertical element, a very dog-legged and sculptural, because now it's in the middle of the space. Okay, that takes you up, and this is where, at the mid-landing, or the mezzanine, what was a wrapped-around plane, same element, now becomes a three-dimensional sculpture from that point. So it's the same element, but your position change, you see it differently. Okay. And then of course the vase, and now again 70 years later this was restored by us in 1997, and you see that it's still fresh, because every day shadows change, every day the vegetation has a different this thing. So that's the idea of timelessness, and what we research to find the principles. So the point is, it's not a documentation. There's an intent, there's an interpretation, and we come back with the correlation. And correlation can be universally be applied in different time with different materials. Okay. How to research? I mean, it's not technicality I'm showing. I'm only showing that if you have that intent and distinction between the documentation versus that sense of purpose, and as a result the nature of data and data's interpretation. Okay, so just documentation is not that. It's just, you've been familiar. I'll run very quickly through that. I'm not trying to kind of go on the book, but typical, as I said, human to human and human to nature, and courtyard is one typology that does the best. So it's a simple inquiry that what is it about that courtyard architecture, how since it has been there, how geographically in Indian or the other context it is present, and why, and what has been its virtues or whatever, that it was considered to be the DNA of a vernacular house typology all across India that you think of. So with that, that's how it has been kind of structured, that first, what is the kind of association or mental predicament about that, that as a bindu, that as a void, from that metaphysical understanding of that courtyard to the function, to the socio-cultural appropriate, to the climatic response, to the art craft, and then the diverse kind of ways in which it gets included or manifested. So well to heaven or window to sky is how it kind of got conceived, one of the five elements, and then idea of bindu from where everything emanates, how it has been also included in these cosmic diagrams like Brahmasthan and the void, and then the whole built up around that, and even from a tribal kind of a place where this is the beginning of a courtyard in some sense, where things happened here and it had that spatial definition, and from there to all civilizations kind of find that as all early first four civilization as the basic. And it was a deep long house, three-side shared, so courtyard was the element around which light, ventilation and functions functioned in that typology. If you cover the courtyard houses, poor houses don't work. you know. So that is the whole genesis. So it's not just the puncture in a built space, and then how even that right from the Vedic time to Buddhist to all that, it was the whole essence or DNA of those, including the royal courts. Then environmental management, and we had actually shadow throw in all. So the point is that I'm not trying to go on these slides, but want to show that there's a rigor. There are all variables that you want to examine, so it's not just by one and then typifying that for extrapolating. No, variables are that there are different proportions of the courtyard. So for example, although all manage with the shadows and light, but if you see the southern courtyard where the breeze is also important, they are squat and wide, versus the northern ones are very tall and less sort of wide. Where the privacy, the cultural ingredient, board houses have a very strong notion of privacy, and their courtyard tend to close off from top, while some other they tend to set back. So it's not just courtyard, but variables with it. The kind of functionalities, day-to-day activities. This happens to be Mr. Architect Venkat's house in Chennai, and right from the birth of a daughter to death of a grandfather or something, everything happened here, including marriage and whatnot, So socio-cultural relevance, the idea of family structure and responding to that, climate, and therefore multi-courtyard rather than one large courtyard, that's where it differs from the colonial courtyard. That's why I say courtyard is a word, but the appropriateness of that for the given context of culture, etc. The elements that define the courtyard, typically craft and art that go with it, staircase and the typologies, fenestration that come along with it, including the way of life like Paniyaru or the Vihichka or whatnot that go with it, and of course the craft, etc. And then it looked at various regions, and I'm just saying that what are the variables we were trying to look out. So urban and the kind of rural or semi-urban. Second, privacy in terms of cultural notions of that privacy, and regional climate variations as well. So there were different ones picked up. So we had each region, not only west as only Gujarat, Maharashtra and Rajasthan, same way north, same way east, same way south, same way center. So we tried to look at pan-India, and even these are the kind of graphics we tried to make, that what is the urban context. Poorhouse courtyard is not understood till you know that the three sides shared, there it's a long, that it forms a street, etc. So it's not a standalone structure. So like that, all regions were sampled, and those graphics were the ones that kind of came out of to understand the context, and that's what these miniature drawings tended to do. They never took building like an object to see. They always put it in the context, and they told you the life, the mood, the mahal of the place. That's why plan sections were intertwined, and so all regions. Idea was not to make a coffee table book to see how glorified the carving is and whatnot. It was to see it as a dwelling type that ran constant in terms of its genealogy, in terms of its kind of DNA, including Ladakh to Kanyakumari. And then there were these comparative analysis, and what are again the factor, whether it's proportion, whether it's the height, whether it's the other set of element, etc. And then how contemporary architects have interpreted that. So again, it's not an exhaustive sampling, but it's represented of the interpretation. Somebody took courtyard as just simply now a light shaft. Somebody took it as absolutely opposite as the multiple living spaces, and likewise. And then even the Mr. Benninger's one is an abstract version of a courtyard where how things still come together, but it's a very different. So one is continuing, as I said, Mr. Venkat's literal translation coming in today's time to recreation of the vernacular in case of Jitendra Bhai Mistri's done house, to interpreted one of a poorhouse, Parantab Bhai Majumdar's own house, to the kind of multiple voids and multiple ways that could extend as a life sort of living spaces, to Shirish Bhai's house and his abstraction of nature coming in. So more courtyard as the one. This is one of our houses design. And Purvamin's version where it ends as a kind of a vegetation court or a light court, and as I said, Mr. Banninger. So just one inquiry and then taking it through the variables and understanding what still comes across as constant and what factors correlate with that variation that we are trying to talk about. So it's not a documentation, it's not a profitable book, but what kind of a DNA that comes out of this. So research, and this is just an example to say that every project, and what I'm saying here is not to show what we have done, but I think every student's exercise is based on some research, and it's what that gives them clarity, and that brings the conviction, and that actually translates into the most important dimensions that they take care of in their design. So it cannot be the comment of the examiner, but it's more his own learning, and that's why it should found even the concepts emerge by interpreting the program based with this. So this is just a small exercise we were asked to do for Vietnam pagoda. There was a very rich person who was making 3 pagodas at a certain siting, and project had not come to us. It was just that Indian stone CNC agency was cheap and good to be employed, but they didn't know anything about the thematic aspects of those panels, so they in turn hired us, and we used some interpretation of future, present and past. We researched, not being a Buddhist, but we researched into Maitreya to this Shakyamuni to Dipankar, whatever the 3 forms. We found out that what are the panels, what looks above and we can't read versus what is at eye level versus below. And for everyone, we came up with number of themes, that one is the past and what are the things that you say, birth story, heroic deeds and incarnations. And accordingly, we created all the panels, I don't know, 100 odd panels, then present, then future, and these were done one to one just to represent. So even a small project, and then the future is all metaphysical things that we know of. Now point is not what we've done, point was that it was a project, but that project required your understanding. And my best compliment that I have had is not by the paycheck, but this Buddhist person who didn't speak English, the owner had an interpreter, what we showed there, and he said, "Professor, you taught us Buddhism." Now the person who lives Buddhism all his life, I'm just nobody, but he thought that we had understood the essence, and we brought to his project the right spirit. And before we left, we had an envelope of $1,000 saying this is just he's happy and is giving you, which we were not to take as a fee from him. But what I mean is that every project is a research. Without that, you can't lay a first line. That's esoteric. And this is, again, here there's a memorial, just 1.5 minute video. Little low. Little low. This is Cadila Pharma, Mr. Indrabhai Modi, his memorial at Dholka, the same place his factory is. So again, picking up things which related to him and then deriving something where every design decision has a lot of meaning. I will not get into that, but just to say that like that Vietnam thing, it gave us a reason to research him, and there's not a single statue of him or anything about him, not a family photograph, and yet as any individual you can spend anything between 2 hours to 2 days here without feeling kind of let out. All this 100% thing from a nothing there was created, inclusion of art, whatnot. So this was the whole journey from nature to man-made, as if he created himself. That was the standpoint. And therefore, from very natural jungle to semi-natured, manicure kind of a space, to very geometric center, and the Bindu where he was cremated was from where things emanate out there. So a lot of those set in place. We didn't know him. We were not their architect even now. But only for this, and even his mother's one we were asked to extend. And on the day of 13th day of mourning, we were invited and said that we need to do something like this, as the son who told us. And when we had a meeting, meanwhile we had researched and we made a presentation. Always everybody warned me that उनके पास time नहीं होता, तू लंबा लंबा बोलता है, जरा कम करना. And I spoke for I think more than 45 minutes to an hour, and to tell you the thing, everything verbatim that we have put as a first PowerPoint presentation has been done here, executed here. In fact, something more all along. Okay, so it was that whole idea that was created. I'll just run through the slide to tell you what was the genesis, and it is not our interpret related to that person. This is where he's cremated. Even now there is an Akhand Jyot, and next to that, and the client said that we don't want to mourn his death, we want to celebrate his life, and that's how inspired from Kun, White, 52 columns, the whole idea of cyclic time. And all that started, and then it came from pharmacy, so the kind of vegetation that gives you so those are the species which relate to their kind of, so religious and herbal, inclusion of craft that talks about Dashavatar, but which means evolution and cycles. This is the, Bhagavad Gita's kind of shlokas from all put in there, and column has 3 energy zones. That's what my book had identified. So this is what is the bronze cast, okay, done by Junior Sagra, of depiction of that shlok. This is 4 language carving of the shlok, and this is kind of schematic depiction of what that wants to be. So again, it's more like a journey that you have in the temple, that you go through Pradakshina Path and eventually come in, and the craft, like the symbols, also get you, or orientation from nothing. So land, water, vegetation, I say that there is only building, but that also you walk over. So it's been submerged in the ground, all natural material, and all inspiring and interactive things. So inform, involve, and inspire is something that we have tried to take it through here, and basically through natural elements. Again, all these, they evoke the essence of what Dharma is rather than the stories, so to say. Each of these also represents the avastha and whatnot. So point is as much that you can relate to, and it's not, it just as a designer your basis, otherwise it could have been anything. But I would vouch for this for every decision, including what is in the center. You can see this is Shringar and one avastha versus, this is children, and therefore bubbling, flowing. This is Grahasth. And inclusion of a lot of craft which is related. Also, this was just value addition. That's what I was saying, that how do you add value? This is one of the schools, and we went through the curriculum, and there was a wall of a size like this for every classroom, and we created these installations in every classroom to support the curriculum, not to reprint the curriculum, and in a dynamic way, whether it's an art, whether it's a puzzle, whether it's, and every standard that you evolve, what it relates to that, including craft, performance, humanities, Now, socio-cultural appropriateness. There was a study done in Japan that if these executives were relieved of their tight tuxedos and were given less formal dressing, they would feel the same level of comfort without having to jack up the AC. So the wrong dressing was the culprit. So in Kerala, if you have these multinational requiring 3-piece Terralin tuxedo with tie, you can only be comfortable with AC. But if the locally, as you see there with the Mund and Mr. Mohanlal also, and bare-chested, are they primitive or they are the truly dressed or appropriately dressed? We knew Gandhi, the real Shashwat or eternal Gandhi, who knew when to veil and unveil, Do we need that, or we want Gandhi to toe a line of what's cool in summer or winter? Look at this, all three narrow lanes. This shows vernacular one, very happy situation, joyous because there is a direct interface. This is out of the planned settlement where the so-called service lane to improve the quality of environment so that all that would be hygienic, but a design decision with cultural understanding going wrong, you have a window, passive window, so everybody throws their muck and is actually the reason for a bad environment. Instead of window, if you had a door, you would have everything positive there. Ahmedabad, you have an interface which is blurred between outside and inside. You don't know it's an encroachment on street or it's a street gone to the house. But 15% religiously kept by law, but not even a window opening, eventually remains abused and unused. Too large a space you can't relate to. And it's not the money, it's the mindset. For example, in a slum, they still prefer an open space rather than putting 4 more houses. At the junction of movement, at no cost, shade-giving tree and a dignified plinth has become a successful group space versus Ballard Estate, one of the most expensive real estate. But look at this, corporate buildings, who is all there. But that attitude has relegated the space at the back as no man's land, and you don't want. When we had answers right today in Ahmedabad, early morning Manek Chowk is a cow grazing ground, same in the afternoon is an intense business district, same in the evening is an outdoor eatery. So now how do we learn from cultural context and apply? So in a sense, if you want to use that word, this was one project we looked at from Vastushil Foundation, the slums of Indore, identified the pattern, and not physical pattern, but the correlatory aspect, that where people want to do what is the meaning of a front space, is Uta not a part of the house or its most significant part of the house, what does it mean to be in a junction, home-based economic activity, etc. And those lessons were then applied to Aranya, the locals housing that was done for 6,000 plus people. The difference is here. Quantitatively, both of them represent exactly the same, but this one is that like those rubber stamped open spaces, but the same one with the cultural understanding that it needs to be a network of different scales and hierarchy of open spaces everybody can come and relate to, is what has made into this kind of a plan with right orientation, etc. And you can see that it turns into neighborhood, streets become outdoor spaces, cul-de-sac one gives the sense of privacy, in between slots are the most active and therefore they self-manage rather than somebody else having to look, backyard for services, and even the house form variation in a mass housing project, that different attitudes, catalog of alternative, you can choose for, as I say, the pluralism through choices, through flexibility of structure, through multiple ways of adapting it, so that's also flexibility, and kit of paths that you can permute and combine. And with that, learning from these settlements, what are the elements that can permute and combine to give them meaningful front of the house and interface with the street. And you can see the 72 demonstration houses that were done. It showed that it can be grown incrementally with the same kit that you choose. It can be permuted and combined, including color, not as constant but variable. This is what one government officer said, and rang do sab kuch gerua, that's where it happened. We had a color scheme also, and thankfully people have started doing that, so that was good. So this is how, even in a mass housing, you achieved that sense of belonging, personalization. This zone, we understood that if you give them, that would be the zone of personalization, otherwise things would encroach. So here it remains there. So this is the way people have built those houses. Cultural things come into those slots. Collectively they agree to do a shrine or a cattle shed. Maybe they hired an architect, and unfortunately the same architect was hired by somebody else. But here you see that two different economic groups could still coexist. So that was the point, that all could enjoy that same level of comfort, and inside you could make it variable. And this is the true certificate, that people feeling sense of belonging and be part of that. Same thing we were able to do a little more into post-earthquake rehabilitation. We worked on 18 villages, but first we actually stayed there. And it was Arab and Camel story that we were first outside the houses. We were there on the 9th day of the earthquake, and gradually we stayed inside, and they said कि अब हम बाहर सोते हैं, you know. So we succeeded there. We saw that they had created habitat in a harsh condition with culture, craft, art and architecture so intertwined. And this had the traditional wisdom, so we even understood that we are not imposing that just for no romance of, just the romance of the past, but this had withstood the same impact, this had given way, the new ones, but the traditional ones had stood upon, and there were enough scientific reasons, I won't get into the details, which we analyzed and found. So we gave the participatory process approach here for right from selection of yourself on a plan, making of a site plan, and then making of your house. So we started interpreting what we saw like this. They said that no, you have failed some classes, maybe you should revisit, but we would like something like that. Then we intervened that, okay, how about some open space, because our ego was hurt, and that's how we managed to do that. So we came up with this layout. We took the model to the site so that orientation is understood, but scale is not an idea that you get from model. So we pegged 4 corners because, you know, we were Ahmedabadis, Kanjus, so 275 was the largest plot and everybody was still getting 400, but we were Ahmedabadi Kanjus. So we pegged one plot and then he said, oh, itna hai. ठीक है, शायद आपके वहाँ नर्मदा का पानी अभी आता है, चलेगा हमें, you know. So that sense of belonging, sense of acceptance and approval of what was happening, then they were the expert in knowing the construction. So we actually selected a site through barter between 2 communities and dredged the soil and created with 10 youth of the community this manually pressed REM mud blocks. And 3,000 blocks every day were produced. They knew how to do this plasticizers, binders. They were building their own houses within that given plot, and therefore they would do the best they want, as they want. Youngest of the family learn from the oldest. That's where you see this 12-year-old know how to do this tricky kind of built form. And 75 rupees in less than 2 months, they created an environment like this, which is what Mr. Amitabh Bachchan wants you to have, Khushbu of Gujarat. We have this Sharadotsav coming now. And this was what that gave us the United Nations Habitat Citation. And 10 years later, we were asked whether our, you know, concepts had any sense, and even the failure to be recorded. And we saw that these are more recent pictures and things had worked that way, that they could adapt to the new, the intermediate technology, and yet you could maintain the tradition and in fact change the ecology. From where the soil was dredged with the clay strata, it became a reservoir with 3 inches of rainfall. I'm showing you the August picture, and that as a result, they on their own initiative started agriculture. So the whole ecology was changed. Culture always flourishes when there is water, and this is what 10 years later, or what we found, that they had been yet continuing with their tradition and had no hesitation adapting to the new. So we have this modernity and tradition as antithesis and the opposite poles. It's only somehow hyped in the Indian psyche, but they can just go hand in hand without any contradiction, so to say. Sustainability, the last component. All these refuse, reduce, recycle, regenerate, and actually in this order, first you should refuse, then you should reduce, then you should recycle, etc., then reuse, because we know that we are so much responsible for energy, the raw material, and even the pollutant, and we think technology is an answer. You can see here, the shopping mall takes 6, this is what do you call this, Himalaya malls figure once upon a time, 565 kilowatt, as against what typically would be used. And very efficient glass can still reduce it to 40% the heat gain, but just common sense, 1 meter awning can already bring it further down to 25% without that sophisticated glass, you know. So many a times these prescribed norms end up into something like this, that same laptop but an extra layer of bamboo chip, and we call it a green laptop, you know. I don't want to get into the politics of those point system, but actually what we need is as commonsensical and playful thing like this, that African children are very happily and insistently taking the turn to rotate this wheel, but by default, this is connected to the pipe below an aquifer. They are lifting it up onto water tank, and by gravity they will get 24/7 the water. So the principles, common sense principle, have insulation through mass, but insulation is a half statement. Also have ventilation, so that we had multi-tiered roof, hot air needs to escape. We use outdoors in the right time. Jali is a fantastic element that give you aesthetic, that diffuse the light and yet give you glow. It retarded the kind of glare. You got one-way privacy. Inside you can see out, but outside you can't see in. Venturi's principle that from a narrow kind of thing, it picks up velocity, and Bernoulli is warm, is cool. Okay, so all those advantages we knew. You know, Padmavati knew how Khilji looked, but Khilji died without knowing even the sense of how beautiful Padmavati was. And Bicker has used this as his language. Three-part window, like thali, ventilation, view, and the air. And you can permute and combine as and when one you want. You know, diffusing the light, multiple use of space. And this is Ahmedabad, why it's been given this, that all those systems put together. For example, contrary to belief, poor house has 2.6 FSI, higher than many of the high rises. You know, dense built form, but terraces and all, you know, vertically projecting profile. So when sun is overhead, the whole facade is in the shade. When it goes down, next comes up. Social interactivity, multiple use of the street and space, morning, afternoon, evening. Courtyard as the most significant element we saw before. Water harvesting, each house can harvest enough water from its 60 square meter rooftop to be fully kind of available for the whole year's drinking and cooking. Mass production and yet craft base as permutation and combination. So each house has its own identity, and yet there is a parity when it all comes together. And as I say, sustainability is a way of life. You know, what fan did with the electric power, you do with the muscle power, a fantastic furniture element that allows you to, you know, you remove this and there's a whole floor open. This can be pushed this way or that way. You can sit or recline. Every day you put a different chadar and it's fresh. And this one, when you swing through evaporative cooling, you feel more comfortable and cool there. And just a very naive thumb rule that warmer the place, spicier the food palette, because again you perspire and it gives you comfort. Now these common sense principles were applied into this non-air conditioned and before this IGBC platinum building, and better performing in terms of its electricity consumption, 22 lakh liter water. So multiple courtyard, taller masses on the southwest, northeast is sunken, management of soil by cut and fill, 22 lakh liter, harvested through roof water, through parapet, the pathway, and the recycled water from the toilets and bathroom. Where we dug, it became a naturally insulated place, multiply used space as outdoors, you don't overbuild. There's insulation, there's cavity wall with ventilation, vertically projecting profile, lot of art integrated into this, multiple use of space and craft that has been put part of this. Again, the research, 3 years intense research, 9 volumes of different kinds that have come in there, was to understand what happens to the waste, 3,200 metric ton of the waste we produce every day in Ahmedabad. And what is that, kind of a thing. So this were the kind of, sorry, was it a clue? So we first looked at the world view, we understood what are the kind of waste, and in fact we used to import the waste, and what is the difference between rest of the world and us. You can see for us inorganic waste is the major component, because organic waste is usually the kitty money for all the mothers and housewives, and we understood what kind of a waste, what cycles it goes through. We looked at 5 urban centers and what's happening there, what is happening to each material. For example, paper, and what from the source it's thrown to what happens later to the glass, how much employment, what cost, what each processes do, including tire, and that's where we found the tire is hardly a waste. Anyways, metal, crate wood, fly ash. Look at this. This many bundle of pipe from that longer distance need to create an excavated pit in which the slurry would go, water would disintegrate, and you would have pile of that ash. That's how it is disposed. So of course making a block out of it, and then we looked at slums, that how do they use the material from a recycled arena, what kind of roofs, what kind of walls, what kind of openings, what kind of other things that comes up, and from there we develop solutions. So it was not arbitrary that tire is a sustainable wall to do. No, how many thousands you would need in one house with a lot of mud to go in, then it's never sustainable from that point of view, because just with a hand tool in Rajkot, the guy does, by that Mobius sort of a strip, almost 3 times the perimeter conveyor belt for a star, industry. And then he makes chapel soles and whatnot. So why tire waste? So we identified what really can be reused, and that's where we created this different blog, and there's a whole documentation of what it costs, what to be mixed along with, and what is its eventual manpower, etc. So this was all independent of a project that we looked at, including Dry City has enough beer, liquor bottle to be found. Nobody gives you 5 paisa for this plastic bottle. Wood is expensive, but crate wood being brittle is only burnt. And even the very basic way of creating this, so floor, wall, opening. All these were tried, they were lab tested for their whatever parameters, prototypes done, and then we got a chance to apply it. So this is now empirical research, but it's demonstrative thing, and this is how, with people's help, with volunteers' help, at a very low kind of end of production system, different materials were used as, and this center in the slum as a school, but multiple community activities happening there as a collage of how many walls, how many ways can you kind of create the built component using digital ways, using municipal ways, using metal scrap, opened up tin container as ventilator, as louver, recycled waste from the broken houses, and even the multiple use. Early morning it's a school, then afternoon it's a skill-based vocational training for the young girls, so that they are employed in digital media. Ayas or the nannies became a kind of guardian of 17 kids, so they earn livelihood when both parents are out. Toddler is looked after, multiple used space, it becomes a community center. So I want to leave you with one matrix that if you look at this 42 dimension, I call it 7 by 6 matrix of holistic learning and teaching, then I think we have covered all those, and that's one method which can help us to both analyze a building for research as well as to our students to kind of look into these. So this matrices are 6 sub-parameters for design concerns, 6 sub-parameters for design dimensions, 6 for points of view, 6 physical elements, 6 spatial element as natural. These are 5 into 6, 30 components with which we encode the clue as an architect or as a designer, while this is the one through which the onlooker or the perceiver decodes it, and these are the tools with which we design. And I think each tool, there's no competition to computer versus sketch, but it's kind of, each has its own merit and dynamics. So if we take the 6 design concern, as I say, any development must look at timeless aesthetics, socio-cultural appropriateness, environmental sustainability, functional fulfillment, economic affordability, and structural strength. We already saw this. I'll just run. To me, this is a wonderful example. I'll not explain for the time, but simply 2 wall and one of the most charged memorial for and most interactive for the Vietnam veterans in Washington DC, just 2 wall architecture, and I have not seen so much emotionally charged architectural space, so to say. 6 points of view. So, oh, one second, missed one. Second one was the 6 design decision, good, bad, ugly building, but you end up taking this 6 design decisions, siting and location. So that is positioning of building over geographic space. Form and massing, that is approach to massing, very tall, short, consolidated or dispersed and all that. Third one is movement and organizational structure. It's symmetrical, it's meandering, it's multiple junctures. So how is the sequence put? Choice of physical elements with which you decide. And material and technique of construction. If it's brick, but brick with arch or brick with vault, or it's something else. And then surface articulation. So good, bad, ugly building, but you end up designing or deciding on the 6 decisions. So that's second matrix. And all those have been very beautifully employed, and with its impact here some other time. 6 points of view. So the whole idea to perceive your development from 6 multiple points. How would you want it to be perceived from far? How do you approach? How do you actually enter? Any 2 points in between your story, and how do you exit? We often think of entry but forget about exit or the return sequence. So these are the 6 kind of points of view. If you can verbally, you talked about the power of word, but you always ask students to imagine the descriptive experiential quality of that journey, and also with sketches. So sketches have a very important role in that. These are actually second year to whatever master student examples. 6 physical elements, that elements of space making talks about it, because physical reality is done through these components, but their spatial role. But 6 natural elements which we often forget, and as I said that when you include that with built, it will be always dynamic. Sun, wind, water, land, vegetation, and people and activity. Grandfathers can watch out of window with people going here and there or doing things, rather than 60 channel Netflix keeps us bored. Because nature is life, nature is existence, nature is outdoors, nature is hope, nature is omnipresent, nature is eternity, nature is time, nature is spontaneity, nature is diversity, nature is celebrate, and nature is inspiration for many things. People perceive through the 6 senses: sight, touch, smell, sound. This we know very well. Taste, of course, is an aesthetic taste, not a Cadbury wall. And notion, that as I said, that the moment you have the icons put in, then it's no longer a bad wall, it's a shrine. So these are the 6. And 7th are the tool, and these are important, and I think all, and I personally think in this sequence. First, free mind mapping. Like I was talking about tree, that whenever you have memorial for Gandhi, then what does memorial mean? What does Gandhi mean? Gandhi means honesty. How does honesty be translated into physical space? Is it not plastering the brick and getting the aesthetic out of the material? Is it transparent wall? Is it anything? Austerity, simplicity. So all that would give us a basis and an anchor about the overarching. Then narrative sketches, that is verbal and visual imagery of the spatial construct, not of form, not of plan. Then spatial installation, that brings the abstract idea before you get into the plan. Otherwise it's 90-degree wall and just protrusion of a plan above. So this allows you to know what is the real essence. Then physical model, then scale drawing, and then of course simulation, rendering, or 3D walkthroughs, etc. So this is the mind mapping. These are some examples of students' work. Verbal narratives or sketch narratives, collages and montages. This is a memorial. The previous one was in urban context. This one is housing. So you know what is it that you are looking at. And the research, meaning I never give, it's a crime in a housing project to say make 3 BHK tower. It's killed all exploration and all inquiry about housing. But instead you say humanizing the vertical living. Instead you say community of productive culture. Instead you say reinterpreting the tradition into modern. Instead you say car-free city, sustainable neighborhood. Then you are looking at an issue. That's what. So these are the installations students have actually done before they come up to their resolution. So collage and installation, there's a meaning to that I won't explain. These are installations about neighborhood, that it's a chemistry, if you have this as a trigger so people use it, and when you slip here then there is a different thing here, if you get up there is a different, so that's about the neighborhood, that each one can generate a certain kind of pull and push. Then the model, in a half an hour you can have various options to realize the same density without having to calculate. Then looked at that three-dimensional understanding, and then this is one student's example for mass housing here. And mind you, this is corona time, half was on the campus, half was back home, and yet second year student coming up with the resolution of high rise, including the kit of parts in the dwelling, etc. This is other one, this is memorial, again the second year student of Sylvia Parts, again research, who that person was, citing what does that mean, what kind of sequence of arrival, exit, intermediate, etc. And therefore it's not just any form, there is a reason. Kurt Cobain, what kind of a life that one went through, and therefore what are the kind of spaces that it creates. So it's a whole journey and a narrative. So to end, that glamour and beauty both catch attention, but glamour, like fashion, fades away in no time, while beauty is everlasting, integral, rather than applique, and timeless, so to say. If there's a minute, I'll run through this passage, or I can forget. Just 2 minutes more. This is just for the younger friends here, that हमारा जमाना बदल गया, आजकल तो fog चल रहा है, This is grandfather asking grandpa, grandson asking grandpa, how old are you? And grandpa replies, son, I was born before television, penicillin, polio shots, frozen food, Xerox, contact lenses, frisbees, credit card, laser beam, pantyhose, air conditioners, dishwashers, and man hadn't yet walked on the moon. Your grandmother and I got married first and then lived together. Every family had a father and a mother. We were before computer dating, dual carriers, daycare centers, and group therapy. Our lives were governed by 10 commandments, good judgment, and common sense. Serving your country was a privilege, and living in the country was even bigger pride. We thought fast food was what people ate during the fasting days. We never heard of FM radios, tape decks, CDs, electric typewriters, yogurts, or guys wearing earrings. We listened to the news and president's speeches on our radios. Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and instant coffee were unheard of. In my day, Coke was a cold drink, pot was something your mother cooked in, rock music was grandmother's lullaby, aides were helpers in principal's office, cheap meant a piece of wood, hardware was found in a hardware store, software wasn't even a word, and we were the last generation to actually believe that lady needed a husband to have a baby. No wonder people call us old and confused and say there is a generation gap. And how old do you think I am? Many, even younger students here, if they were there, would have thought that this is once upon a time, dinosaur was going around, primitive man was rubbing stone to ignite fire, how could you live without pizza, Coke, and all that? It's only 70-year-old story, but have we changed as human beings? This is 100-year apart. So just because, we have some machine called smartphone, only smartness it has is that you forget your wife's phone number unless you read it into this, We used to remember more phone numbers before. Yes, what has changed is the fashion. There was a time you had to push kid in to study. Now is the time you have to throw him out to play. We used to chain a dog, now we chain ourselves where there is a charger. One technology brought from round the globe people on the same space, and another technology at the same space, each one is in their own world. We had our own WhatsApp, we had our own CCTV, we had our own surfing. So point is we can empower through design, but the quality is to improve the quality of life. The goal is to improve the quality of life of place, people, and planet. And for Indian context, I would say that rather than giving Gandhian currency the value, we might want to make Gandhian value itself the currency, And we have a repository of wisdom of 6,000 years. So inspire from yesterday, but aspire for tomorrow. And then we can traverse in the immensity of this time and space and of notion and reality of a context called India. Thank you so much. Thank you. Clap is a tradition to wake people up. And darkness is the sympathy and the courtesy that you give people to nap.
Thank you so much, sir. Each word of the presentation, each slide is definitely a great learning for us. We are fortunate to have you today.
Thank you.
I request Anshuman sir to give a memento.
Oh.
After this, we'll be designing our bites.
Oh.
We'll be having a 30 minutes lunch break.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh. It hides my tummy well. Thank you.